Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ask the Expert webinar, The AI Advantage, How SAS Customer Intelligence 360 Solves Real Marketing Challenges. My name is Tiago de Souza, and I will serve as your moderator for today's event. Now, I would like to take a moment to introduce our presenter, Mac Carlton, a product manager here at SAS for SAS Customer Intelligence. He focuses on building analytics and Gen AI-powered abilities for marketing teams. Since joining SAS, Mac has developed some of the first Gen AI capabilities in SaaS solutions, advised customers on data and AI strategy, and has more recently joined the product team to deliver AI and analytics for customer intelligence solutions. This presentation was also brought to you by Mike Turner, but he is unable to join us today. But rest assured, you're in good hands with Mac. Mac, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Tiago. It's great to be here today, everyone. We've got a lot of exciting content to cover. All right. So again, the title of this presentation is The AI Advantage, how CI360 solves real marketing challenges. As Tiago mentioned, my co-presenter Mike was unable to make it today, but I'm still going to try to keep this session in the spirit of a Ask the Expert webinar. So the way that I kind of built out this agenda was really just, I'm going to present essentially 5 questions that hopefully are topics that you all are interested in, and kind of pose them to myself, and then share some results. So throughout the session today, I'll go over some of our strategy for generative AI, what our approach is, what capabilities we already have released with AI, what's coming soon. I'd love to dive into the topic of trustworthy AI and how we deliver responsible AI capabilities. And I'm going to wrap up with a very exciting topic in this space right now, agentic AI. I'll show you our approach, and I'll also show you a little preview of what's coming out in the solution in just a couple of months. So that should be very exciting. As Tiago mentioned, feel free to use the chat Q&A functionality throughout the webinar. At the end, we should have 15 minutes or so where I can answer any of the questions that you all have. But I'm going to go ahead and get started with, how are we approaching generative AI at a very high level? I'm actually going to start with this nice visualization. I did not create this. This was created by Scott Brinker at chiefmartech.com. If you haven't seen this site before, I think he's a really interesting voice in the MarTech space and does a great job of capturing trends in the space, especially as it relates to AI. I was fortunate to see him talk a couple of times last year, and he often showed kind of this visualization, which kind of approximates the diffusion of AI technology as of 2025. And I think it's really important to see this and kind of orient ourselves before we go into this presentation, because it tells us a lot about the current state of AI. I spend every day working with AI, so I kind of have a skewed worldview of this technology. But if you look at the distribution here, the vast majority of people are really just getting introduced to AI, even though it's been a big topic for several years now. So if we look at the early majority, for example, that's using free AI assistants like ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini. That's where the majority of people are at in their adoption journey with AI. And so something I'm often asked by marketing organizations is, we observe this really chasm to cross between this early majority of using AI assistants to more advanced use cases like having your own internal AI workflows, using AI agents, things like that. And making that jump from that early majority into that early adopters, innovators type of world can be very difficult. And I think there's really 2 ways that you can go about it as a marketing organization. One way is to rely on trusted partners and vendors and rely on some of the technologies that they're releasing. And the second way to do it is to kind of develop these capabilities in-house and deploy your own AI solutions. So what I want to do today is, share our approach to generative AI in CI360, show you what tools you can be using today to help cross that chasm. What I'm going to also do is give you a little bit of behind the scenes and tell you about our thinking about how we go about developing generative AI capabilities, how we select different use cases to build out, how we do this in a responsible way. And I hope that by the end of the session, really the takeaway from you all is, first, you're excited about what CI360 is building and what we have in this space, but also some insight on how we go about pushing forward the boundaries of this technology and, becoming early adopters and innovators in this space. So that being said, at a very high level in CI360, our kind of North Star guiding principle with generative AI is to help marketers move faster, reduce manual work, and make confident decisions with AI-powered insights and automation within our solution. And we can deliver on this kind of North Star, this promise, in three different ways. So we have three different broad capability groups for AI that we like to think about. That's assistants, co-pilots, and agents. And so you all may be wondering, well, what are the differences between these capabilities? Why should I care about this? And I think this slide kind of nicely captures the distinction that we make here. So I like to kind of like pretend to plot out assistants, co-pilots, and agents on a graph where one axis is the agency of the AI system. So how independent can the system act? And then the y-axis being the responsibility of the system. So this is how broadly does AI support the user. So when we think about assistants, these are relatively low agency and low responsibility. These are these smaller inline tools. For example, in CI360, we have an assistant that can generate content alternatives for things like subject lines. This isn't a very high agency or a huge responsibility that AI is taking on, but it's still very helpful. It can generate content suggestions, help you run A/B tests, things like that. If we step up to an AI agent, which we'll get into in a lot more detail in this session, this is suddenly much broader responsibility and agency as well. This may be where you give an agent some instructions on a journey that you'd like to create. And it's going to take a lot of responsibility. It's going to go out and find the correct objects to link into the journey. It'll design the journey flow, set up the schedule, things like that. It's going to act much more broadly in the system. And the point that I want to make here is, in CI360, we think about investing in capabilities across all three of the levels that you see here. We see a lot of value in these smaller, more lightweight AI assistants that can help you in line as you're going through workflows. And we also see that there's tremendous potential and value in AI agents as well. So throughout the session today, we'll see examples of all three of these capability types, and you'll get a picture or a sense of how they all fit together. I also just thought this slide would be helpful as well as we talk about our approach, like what's really guiding our current roadmap with generative AI. And I think we can boil this down really into four main points. So again, kind of going back to our first star, anything that we do with generative AI should really be with the idea of accelerating the time that our customers, the time that it takes for them to get value out of our solution, CI360. The second point, and this is super important to SAS and customer intelligence as well, is we want to enable our customers to use AI in a safe and trustworthy way, which we'll talk about in our session today, how we do this. And then the third one, and this is newer, this more emerged in 2025, is we recognize the impact that AI agents are likely going to have on the future of software and also on the future of marketing. And so we want to be prepared for that future, and we want to help deliver, some really exciting AI agents that our customers can use as well. And then kind of the final point is, CI360 is a relatively large portfolio. We have lots of different modules from segmentation, journey building, analysis, decisioning, things like that. We want to make sure that we distribute where we're building AI broadly across our solutions. We like to talk about having like common use AI. So we want to make sure that as much of our customers as possible can take advantage of the tools and systems that we're building. So that's certainly a driver as well. And then finally, I'm going to save a lot of this for later in the session, the exciting part around AI agents. But just kind of our high level view on this is I know lots of different vendors are approaching agents in a different way. At a high level, the way that we see them in CI is we see them as collaborators in our system. So the future that we envision for AI agents is we think they're really going to change how we interact with software in the coming years. And what we want to do is deliver a set of agents across the entire experience within CI360. To help you build out customer journeys, create audiences and segments, build out decision flows, things like that. And we'll get a lot more into this as we continue in this session. So that's kind of an overview of where we are. Next, I want to talk about what capabilities are available today in CI360. So the first one that we released is a content generation use case. So if you're an email customer, you can take advantage of this feature today. We can generate subject line alternatives. We selected this use case because we think AI might not be great for full-on copywriting, like creating an entire email. We see a lot of issues arise there. We found that it's very useful for short form content generation and also creating variations of content. So you can see what I'm doing here is I'm generating alternatives. I'm giving the model some instructions on what I want the alternatives to have, such as having emojis. And something else that's really interesting that we can do is we can run A/B tests. So several of our customers have done this where we'll take a human written subject line and A/B test it against an AI generated variant. Something that's really cool about CI360 is we can actually track this in our data model, so you can perform some analysis on the performance of AI generated content against human written content. So that's a cool experiment that our email customers can run and take advantage of. The second one I wanted to show is our Copilot in CI360. So this released last year. We're very excited about this. This is a conversational interface that's available anywhere in CI360. It can be accessed from our Copilot button. And essentially, our Copilot has access to lots and lots of information about CI360. So our user guide, our best practices, tips and tricks, even our API reference and things like that. And it's designed to be a conversational interface where users can ask questions about the solution. You know, if you're ever stuck on a new workflow, if you're a new user, you're just onboarding onto CI360, you're trying to come to terms with our terminology that we use. It's a great resource that you can take advantage of. And again, it's entirely grounded in publicly available documentation that we have. So every response comes with citations, and it can link you directly to the knowledge source that the Copilot was using. So I find this to be a very useful tool. Even as a product manager for CI, I still use this tool several times a week whenever I have questions about the solution, even if it's just as simple as what's new in CI360, what has been released recently. Third capability I wanted to showcase, this is in our audience area, which our audience building capability connects with your cloud data sources and is a very easy, intuitive way to build out audiences. We've added an audience assistant to this capability. And what this allows you to do is describe the audience you'd like to create in natural language, and then generative AI will build out those audience inclusion and exclusion criteria for you. It'll also select the attributes that need to be brought along for use in targeting and personalization within your campaigns. So you can see that running here as well. I'm just asking for a relatively simple audience. You can see it presents back the results that I can review, make sure everything looks good before I approve and actually run or execute that audience. So that's kind of an overview of where we are today. I want to next spend a little bit of time talking about our upcoming generative AI features. So something that I'm very excited about is, this year we have a lot on the roadmap. We have a lot that's currently in development. So, all across CI360, we should be seeing new releases coming around Q2, Q3. I've tried to put up some estimates of when you can expect these features. These are just best estimates, but hopefully gives you a sense of when everything is coming out. So I know there's a lot on this slide, but I'm just going to go through it step by step to kind of give you a lay of the land here. At a high level, what our generative AI roadmap, like what our goal is for this year is, first of all, we want to deliver multiple AI agents in 2026. The first one that's going to be released will be an agent for journeys, which we'll actually get to preview a little bit today, which is very exciting, and should be followed by an audience agent as well coming later in the year. But alongside all these AI agents, we're also really excited to deliver a variety of AI assistants across a lot of different capability types. So I'm just going to step down this list here and talk a little bit about each of them. I've tried to organize this by, these broad parts of our solution for you all to see. So I already mentioned the journeys and audiences agents. Again, we have a section later where I'll get into a lot more detail on this. The third area is our destinations, so like our channels and tasks that we support. We saw a lot of interest and adoption and pickup with our email subject line generation capabilities. So we're really excited to be bringing those similar capabilities into other channels. So with push notifications, generating alternative titles and push notification body text, We'll be supporting that later this year. And as well as for our native SMS task, using generative AI there to create alternatives. And we'll also be enhancing our subject line generator as well. One piece of feedback that we got from customers is it would be really nice to have an input field where I can generate alternatives, but also, describe what I want those alternatives to look like. So being able to add some additional instructions. So all three of our upcoming content generation capabilities will include that as well. So I'm very excited to see what people use these assistants for. Marketing AI is an upcoming module for CI360. It's expected to come out early this summer, Q3. Marketing AI, I'm a little bit biased here because it's a solution that I work on as well alongside generative AI for CI360. But essentially at a high level, marketing AI is a solution that accelerates and makes it really easy for marketing organizations to create machine learning models, do analysis for common marketing use cases. So think about building propensity models to know who's most likely to make a purchase or who's likely to churn in my business, who should I be targeting in retention campaigns. It can also build out recommendation systems like next best action modeling, things like that. And a big part of that experience is trying to simplify how you go about doing data analytics and modeling. And a big way that we do that is by using a lot of generative AI to help our users. So on the data preparation side for modeling, we'll have a recipes agent that dramatically accelerates data prep. Again, you can conversationally interact with the agent and it can build out all of your analytical base tables for you and assist you with that process. We'll also have lots of recommendations on things like, well, I'm training a model. I want to make sure that it's a fair model. Well, marketing AI can use generative AI to help recommend which columns should I evaluate for bias in my model and how do I mitigate for that. Another really cool use case that is emerging in marketing AI with generative AI is using generative AI to explain my model results. So I've trained a model. Training a model relies on looking at some pretty complicated and very data sciencey performance metrics like the F1 score, accuracy, and precision. And so what we've done is we've used generative AI and given it context of your use case as well as the results of your model. And it's able to come up with these really friendly explanations of the results and help provide guidance to the user. And this application of AI for like explainability of results is something that has been really successful in our prototyping and POC work. And so I would also expect that to, start showing up in other parts of CI360 in the future as well. Another new module is marketing decisioning, which is coming out Q3 this year as well. We're also looking at using generative AI there, very similar to the audience assistant that we just showed, where you're describing in natural language your criteria for an audience. Then generative AI is looking at the data, building out those criteria for you. Decisioning has a lot of criteria that you have to build out for various eligibility rules, things like that. So we'll have like a natural language assistant there as well, where you can just describe in natural language, English, whatever language you prefer, the criteria, and it'll generate that for you, present it back to you for human review. And then the kind of final grouping, we call it application experience. These are mostly just things that touch all parts of CI360, kind of like our co-pilot that I showed a couple of slides back. There's a couple new changes coming here, which we're excited about. First of all, we're going to introduce more flexible settings for generative AI. I'll actually show those in a couple of slides. We've also had this kind of cool internal hackathon-like project where we've used AI for autocomplete and auto-populating fields in CI360 as kind of an accelerator. It's a relatively small capability, but it still saves our users time and can be very useful. So we're going to start rolling that out. I believe we're going to start in certain places in journeys with this autocomplete ability, but we certainly expect it to grow to other parts of the solution over time as well. And then the final thing is a search agent, which will be a part of the Journeys agent release. And I'll get into a lot more detail on that later in this session. So that's kind of an overview of the near-term roadmap. I know it's a lot. The big point I want to get across here is you're seeing that we're continuing to roll out additional AI assistants. We're also taking the whole AI agents thing very seriously. That's a area that we're very excited about. And we're also trying to distribute where we're building AI all across the solution. And there are several items on this roadmap that I haven't even brought up today, but wanted to keep it all in one slide, relatively tame. Okay, so the next kind of question, third one here, is how do we deliver trustworthy AI capabilities? So this is a really big thing for us at SAS. We have what's called a data ethics practice, which is this really cool organization that provides guidance to customers, but also to solutions at SAS, like Customer Intelligence, on when working with generative AI, large language models, and even traditional AI systems, providing guidance on how you do that in a responsible, trustworthy, and compliant manner. And so this is a very holistic approach to how we go about, coming up with use cases for generative AI, how we build and test those use cases, how we release them to customers, the types of guardrails that we develop around our capabilities, and all that thing. So I want to get and provide a little bit of detail on how we go about this. The one thing that I wanted to note here is we are EU AI Act compliant for all of our generative AI capabilities. So the past summer, phase 1 of the EU AI Act started. We kind of see that as the gold standard for regulation around generative AI capabilities. So even if you aren't in the EU, I still think this is important information to know, because it means that CI and SAS is keeping up with the latest regulatory compliance. Often what happens in the EU around regulation of AI capabilities, data, things like that, kind of becomes the global standard. So we'll get into a little bit more detail there. But I want to start by kind of making this point, because when I think about trustworthy AI, there's a lot of lenses that we could talk about this from. Again, it's model selection, which use cases are we going after, how are we testing it, how do we release it to our customers? But to me, what I think is a really central part of trustworthy AI that often isn't talked about much is how do you come up with the use cases that you want to build out and make sure that they're ethical, capable and reliable use cases that you're releasing. And this is something that I, along with the people in research and development for CI360 who work on generative AI, spend a lot of time thinking about and experimenting with. So I want to introduce this concept briefly of the jagged frontier. And this is something that's been researched in AI and the generative AI space. I think it came out in around 2023, but I think it's still very relevant today. So to kind of orient you with what you're seeing on the screen, we have this gray dotted line. And what this represents is just a set of equally difficult tasks. So this could be across any domain. This could be, tasks for marketing, like content generation or segmentation. This could be mathematics, writing code, any type of task that you would give an AI system. And so this gray line represents what humans perceive to be equally difficult tasks. And then layered on top of that, we're mapping what are the latest AI models' actual abilities. And so what you see is they exhibit a jagged frontier. And what that means is that for some use cases or for some tasks, they're what we call inside the frontier, which means AI is very capable of doing this task. They can do it quickly. They can do it reliably. They don't need much human intervention to complete the task. A good example of this in the context of CI360 is generating subject line alternatives. It does this very reliably. It's not a huge challenge for it. There are also some tasks along this curve that are what we call on the frontier. These are kind of these boundary tasks where AI can complete the task, but it's not super reliable. And it requires a lot of human oversight to make sure it's not going off the rails or making any mistakes, things like that. And then there's a third type of task that we observe, and these are tasks that are outside of the frontier. So these are tasks that they feel equally difficult to this green star and yellow star that you see on the screen. But for whatever reason, AI just isn't very suited for this task. It's not really capable of completing it. And in fact, if you ask AI to complete this task, maybe it'll try to do it, but it's highly likely to generate errors or actually, degrade, the output or the quality of the results for that task. And so when I think about trustworthy AI, a big part of this to me is making sure that we select appropriate use cases and evaluating these models' capabilities and making sure that we're building and delivering AI capabilities that are inside the frontier or on the frontier. So you can see some examples that I've put up on where I think certain tasks map out on the current jagged frontier for AI in the marketing space. The other point I'll make here is it's also worth noting that this frontier is constantly evolving. So I would say roughly every 6 months, a new generation of AI models gets released, and they represent like a step change improvement in terms of what these models are capable of doing, how we interact with them. And so use cases that were previously outside the frontier, like untenable for AI, suddenly become possible over time. So another thing that we do is we keep track of like, how did these models improve over time, and what types of use cases does that unlock for us? New use cases that we can build in a trustworthy and responsible manner. A really good example of this is in the beginning of 2025, people were starting to talk about AI agents, but there weren't really any models that could support AI agents for many use cases. They were very unreliable. When you ask an agent to go off and do something within a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes, it would make some huge mistake and kind of fall apart. But by mid last year, like 6 months into the year, suddenly programming agents, agents for writing code, helping software engineers became very viable. And by the end of the year, nearly every software engineer is using some form of coding agents. So again, this frontier is always moving. And what I expect to see this year is, and especially in the agent space, the amount of domain agents that we see, not just for coding, but for marketing and many other domains as well, is just going to explode as this frontier continues to move. So that being said, kind of on the note of trustworthy AI, I think a great resource that you all can check out, it's available externally, is this white paper that we did and published on our approach to generative AI. And what's in this white paper, it's pretty detailed, but it really just outlines our holistic approach to how we go about doing generative AI. It talks about what types of large language models do we use behind the scenes, why did we choose those models. We talk about how we, why we chose our model provider, and how we protect your data while it's in transit, make sure that it's private, meaning none of the AI labs who provide these models can use your data for retraining or anything like that. So it talks a lot about like the privacy and security of the AI capabilities that we offer. And it also outlines, why we've chosen our different use cases, why we think they're responsible, how we do, testing and guardrails evaluation and all of that good stuff. Again, like I mentioned, it's a very holistic document on how we go about doing generative AI. We found this to be a very useful resource, especially if you need permission from other groups in your organization to enable generative AI for CI360. So a lot of time this document gets shared with your legal or IT teams, and it can be a great resource to give everyone in your organization, confidence that we're doing this in a responsible way so that you can go ahead and turn it on, take advantage of our Gen AI capabilities. And on that note, just a quick aside on how you can get started with generative AI. So one thing I'm very happy to say is that, there's no additional fees or licenses or anything like that associated with generative AI for CI360. All you need to do is have an admin for your environment, go to general settings, there's a generative AI tab, and it's just a toggle. You flip on generative AI and it's up and running for your organization. By enabling the toggle, you accept some additional terms like our generative AI terms. We provide a link to that in CI360. You can also find it on the SAS website that your legal team can review. It's pretty simple, straightforward document. Something else I want to highlight here is we also recognize that different organizations have different policies around what is acceptable versus unacceptable use of AI. So something that will be coming out in CI360 in a couple of weeks are these opt-out options in our settings. So for example, if you have an organizational policy where they say, hey, we don't want you doing anything with content generation and AI, you're able to opt out of it here. Similarly, if your organization has a policy saying, hey, you can't really use AI for any type of use case that touches customer data, like that audience assistant I showed earlier, you can also opt out of those use cases in our settings here. So our hope is that by providing more flexible settings, more of our organizations will be able to turn on and start to adopt our generative AI features, even if it isn't every single one of them initially. All right. So the next session is what are we doing in the agentic AI space? So this is a very exciting topic. I like to think about we typically see these like annual trends and like what's the big buzzword or term that everyone's talking about in the AI space. I think 2 years ago everyone was talking about co-pilots. Last year we got a lot of momentum around agents, and I think into the first half of this year, probably all year, agentic AI and AI agents are still a very hot topic. But I also know that a lot of people are skeptical about AI agents. I think the vast majority of people still haven't ever used an agent. Maybe you've seen some demos online, but mostly you're just hearing people throw around this word a lot. So what I want to do in this section is, first of all, talk about some of the data that I've looked at that's making me increasingly confident that we're moving towards this agentic future. I then want to talk about kind of our high-level strategy for agents and what we envision happening in CI360 over the next several years. And then I want to show you some of the first agents that are going to be released in CI360 coming up in just a few months now. And so just give you a little demo of those, let you all experience that. So that's kind of the plan here. So I'm going to start with a quick tangent, a brief tangent on AI chess programs or chess bots. And I promise I'm going to bring this back to agentic AI and what it means for CI360. But just to get started here, there's this researcher, Andy Jones. He works at Anthropic, which is an AI lab, and he has this really great article, and it's just kind of discussing progress in AI over time and trying to relate that to like historical events that we've observed. But let's kind of like make sense of this visualization here. So on the left side, we have the chess ranking of the best humans in the world. The highest ranking you can achieve in chess is a grandmaster. So we're plotting the performance of grandmasters versus AI chess programs like chess bots. And so on the y-axis of the graph, you see ELO. ELO is just a rating system in chess. It's also used in many other games as well, but you can just think of it as a way that we rate the performance of players. And then along the bottom is time. So in the early 80s, the first chess programs started getting released. These are very small versions of AI compared to what we have today, but AI nonetheless. And they released with like a very modest ELO of around 1750, which is pretty decent, not super great. Obviously leagues away from the performance of grandmaster chess players who are up at like 2750 ELO roughly. And what we see is about every year, roughly, these AI programs would improve at chess by about 50 ELO a year. And you can see on that left graph here that this is like a very linear, steady improvement. It wasn't super dramatic. It wasn't super quick. And what's really interesting here is if we look at the year 2000, in the year 2000, a grandmaster could expect to beat AI chess program in about 90% of their games. So 9 out of 10 games, a human grandmaster is going to beat an AI program at chess. But by the year 2010, just 10 years later, it's a very different story. By 2010, AI programs could beat humans in chess, roughly 90% of the time. And today, it's almost impossible for a human to ever beat an AI program at chess. So what is this kind of like story? What are these graphs really telling us? So what we're seeing is the progress, the improvement in AI was very steady. It's almost linear on this visualization here. But for a very long time, humans were still much, much better than AI programs at chess. But the equivalence of the chess program to humans was very sudden. Again, in that 2000 to 2010 window, we went from dominating computer programs at chess to losing to them nearly all of the time in chess. And so what this kind of like tells us is just kind of how humans experience the advancement of technology. And it's actually kind of this trend that we see a lot of the time with dramatic technological change. There's a very similar graph of horses versus steam engines and horses versus cars. Like as steam engines get more and more efficient over time, they steadily improve over decades. Number of horses that are used for transportation never really changed until right when, steam engines became more efficient than horses. And there was this just dramatic shift in what was used for transportation. So we experienced this a lot with technology. And kind of bringing this back into like modern AI systems, I'm going to show one more visualization and I'm going to be done with this tangent, I promise. This is another kind of benchmark done by Meter, and this is a little bit different. What we're looking at here is the performance of like modern AI systems, so from 2020 onwards, across many different domains. So for doing complex reasoning tasks, to doing math, to doing full self-driving, all of these different applications of AI across many different domains. And what this chart is measuring is how long these models can work independently or autonomously on different tasks. And like, what is that time horizon that the models can work independently? And this is a really important measure because models need to work independently without human intervention to be suitable for like this agentic AI world. We're asking models to go off and do things for us for long periods of time. And what you can see is we're here in 2025 and the state of the art models can work independently for like nearly an hour on tasks, which is like a very long amount of time. If we look back just into 2022, for example, that number was a minute. So the improvement that we're seeing in modern AI systems is not linear like the chess programs that we were just looking at a slide ago. These are improving exponentially, like very, very rapidly. And so I'm not going to make any speculations on, when we're going to get AGI or these super intelligent systems or what that future is going to look like. I'm not going to speculate on any of that at all. But what this does tell me is that, it's highly likely that we are not very far from a very agentic future. So when we are planning in customer intelligence, we're recognizing that the way that we use software, the way that we do marketing is very likely to change in the coming years. So we want to work towards that future. So bringing it back to CI360, again, this is a customer intelligence solution kind of portfolio at a very high level. What we imagine, like I said, is kind of this agentic future where you can operate our software via AI agents that we build out. And so how are we going to do that? At a high level, what we imagine is having a multi-agent system that operates CI360 alongside its users. And so what I mean by multi-agent is that users will interact with one agent. We could call that the 360 agent, whatever the name is. It's kind of the one that you see at the top here. And it kind of acts as an orchestrator. So it takes in requests from the users, and then it delegates that work out to a family of sub-agents that it can interact with. So we will have an audience agent in the future that can build, create, and manage audiences, a similar one for journeys, similar agents for all of our tasks like email, SMS, push notification. We'll have a segmentation agent eventually. I think you get a sense of what it looks like. And the benefits for this is the user doesn't have to pick which agent it's working with. It just interacts with one agent, the 360 agent, but that agent is smart and it knows about all of these domain-specific specialized sub-agents and can call upon them to help them complete tasks over time. And so to give you an example of how this works, we'll start by talking about what will our initial agentic AI release be. So what we want to introduce is a journeys agent for CI360. This is coming out in Q2. We're very excited about this. Essentially how this works is users can describe the journey that they'd like to create. You could also upload a journey brief like a PDF or Word doc to the agent, and it can process that, build it out in CI360. You can also do cool things like maybe you have an image of the journey you like to create, or maybe you've done a little whiteboard session. You can take a picture of an image, upload it as well. It accepts multimodal inputs. The agent then will attempt to build out the journey based off the instructions that you provide. It'll find the relevant tasks and audiences and pull those in for use in the journey. And it's very human in the loop. So we recognize that many people won't be comfortable with like fully autonomous agents. We don't think that's responsible yet. So we involve humans and get manual approval, throughout this process. So I could keep talking about it, or I could show you a quick demo here. I want to preface this by saying this is still a work in progress. You're likely going to see some tweaks and changes before the actual release, but it gives you a really good picture of where we're at. So I'm going to access our Copilot tab You can see that within our Copilot panel, we have two tabs. One's for explain, which is that kind of documentation use case I described. The other one is our agent interface. I've uploaded an image, a journey diagram that I want to use, and I'm also going to provide a description of the journey as well. So in this case, we're going to build out a reactivation journey. I've described which audience I want to use, what the goal of my journey is, how I want to do holdouts, and what the scheduling should look like. The agent's going to start by processing all the information I gave it, and it's going to come up with a plan for what it's going to build out. Again, this is where human in the loop comes into play. We're going to require like manual human approval of the plan before the agent goes off and builds anything. So once I've approved it, it's going to proceed with starting to build out this journey. Something that you'll see in a second here is you're actually going to get to watch this journey get built out in the UI. It's going to open up a new journeys object, and you're going to see it get configured. This is like a really important design decision for us, because I think it's important that humans remain in control. They get to monitor what the agent's doing. And so you can quickly cancel or pause the agent if it's starting to make mistakes or do anything that wasn't intended. So it's really cool. You can see this all getting built out in real time. So it'll do things like build out all of the nodes. It'll find the appropriate audiences and tasks for your use case and link those into the journey. It'll also configure all like the metadata configurations, the journey purpose, the journey goal, things like that. So we get to watch the agent work, and in a second here, it'll come back with the results. Something else that's really cool about this agent is it might not completely configure 100% of a journey before you. It really depends on what instructions or context you provided to it. But in its response, once it's done working, it'll tell you exactly what it did, what assumptions that it made, and also what's next. It'll ask you kind of like follow-up questions like, hey, if you give me this information, I can set up the start date for the journey and things like that. But you can see the response was made. It's telling you all the assumptions, and I'm also just reviewing the journey object really quick. You can see I'll go through the panels, and I can see all the journey conditions that were configured and the engagement metrics, all those configurations as well. So it's pretty cool. We're really excited about this Journeys agent capability. It's just the first of multiple agents that we plan to release this year. The other really cool thing that's coming out alongside the Journeys agent is the search agent. And we actually built this agent so that the Journeys agent could use it. And then we realized that, hey, it might be useful for our users as well to get to take advantage of this agent. So this search agent initially has the ability to look for tasks and audiences in your environment. Over time, we'll slowly expand what types of objects it can search for. So things like segments, projects and marketing AI, creatives and other types of content, maybe even events as well. But just to start, it's just tasks and audiences. And I want to show you a quick demo of this and how you can use it. I think it's incredibly useful to give you some kind of operational insights or view into what's going on in your environment. So I'm going to start by asking it, which tasks need my attention? And so right now it's going to look through all the tasks. It's going to look for tasks that might have errors or tasks that might be out of sync. Any ones that have some type of problem. What's cool about this is it's not just going to spit back a list of objects for me to look at manually. It's going to do some kind of like lightweight analysis and try to be really helpful. So it'll describe, you can see here, it'll try to prioritize, what's really critical, what needs my first attention, in this case, tasks with errors. It'll also link specific objects I think I should review, which I can open up as I'm doing here on the screen. It's just a very, helpful tool and gives you a really good idea of what's going on in your environment. So you can see it came back with tasks with errors, tasks that were out of sync, tasks that were stuck in designing, haven't been activated yet, and the pause tasks. I'll do a little bit more specific of a query. So now I'm asking email tasks in particular, how many of those are out of sync? And we'll see what it comes back with in just a minute here. Yeah, we're really excited about the search agent. And I think this agent is only going to become more and more capable over time as we add more objects to it. And I think it's fun to use. The other thing I'll note is this is like an internal testing environment. So that's why you're going to see such a high number of tasks that are in designing or have errors and things like that. If you can see, it found that in this case, there were 59 email tasks out of sync. It linked me to a couple of those. The last example I'll show for this agent here is, let's talk about audiences a little bit. So I was just kind of curious here. Again, this is an internal tenant. I was just curious, like, how many different audience sources do we have set up? You can create connections to lots of different places to build audiences from. So places like Amazon Redshift, Google BigQuery, Snowflake. You can import or upload audiences from direct or use our API. And so I was like, what's most frequently used here? You can see it came up with the top 5 individual audience sources, but then it also went on and did, by connection type, some like light analysis there. So it looks like Snowflake was most popular in this case, but we're also using the upload API alongside direct, like using segments and audiences, and then BigQuery and Redshift as well. So just thought that was interesting. And so with that, that kind of wraps up my presentation. I know we covered a lot of content over the last 40-ish minutes, but I want to pause now and just answer any questions that you all may have.
Thank you. With that, we'll be moving into the Q&A segment of the webinar. All right, Mac, now on to our first question here. Someone said, I've heard about Via Copilot. Is this part of CI Copilot?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we get that a lot. So currently the Via Copilot and the CI360 Copilot are 2 entirely different copilots. A lot of it's due to the nature that CI360 is like software as a service on AWS, and the way that Via works is completely different. But I would imagine that over time, as both these copilots mature, it's very likely that you'll see like integrations between the 2.
Gotcha. Thank you. Another question here. Do we have any approximate timeline when the AI agents in CI360 would be available to test for partners and for customers to use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're really looking at, an April release for the Journeys agent. The other thing that I really should have mentioned in the presentation is we are 100% looking for early adopters or testers for this as well. So if there's anyone that you can reach out to from your account team at SAS, or you can get in touch with me directly, I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about what that would look like.
Great. Thank you. Someone's asking, how do you make sure that any application of AI in your tool is ethical and does not demonstrate bias?
Yeah, so I want to start with that second part first, like does not demonstrate bias. That's obviously very important with language models. The tough thing is there's no way to be like 100% certain that something isn't going to demonstrate bias. We do a lot internally to make it as ethical and trustworthy as possible. So we use guardrails, which essentially monitor the inputs and outputs of AI to ensure that they're on topic, relevant to the use case, not introducing bias. And that can really catch a lot of the use cases. Something else that we do is before we do any AI release, we do a lot of internal testing. And we really are testing the guardrails of the system. So kind of asking the AI crazy things, making sure it's refusing, to output bias responses and results. We also work with the data ethics practice at SAS. They provide a lot of guidance here on how we do that. So again, like the reality with AI, they're non-deterministic systems. We can't fully guarantee that they won't ever be biased, but we do try to do a lot of testing and upfront guardrails work to mitigate for that outcome.
Perfect. Thank you. We have another question here. Will agents be able to fix errors in a customer journey in the future?
Yeah, so a part that I'm very excited about with agents, and especially the Journeys agent that you just saw, is we kind of teach the Journeys agent, like, how do you build a valid journey in CI360? But we're not just hoping that, it like gets it right the first time. Like these agents can actually work iteratively. And so it'll try to submit a journey. CI360 could come back and say, hey, that's invalid. Like, you can't link in that task type, or you're using the wrong type of node, or you put in an invalid schedule, stuff like that. And it can take that feedback, that error message essentially, and iterate and try again. And so that's a really cool part of agents is they're able to work over time and learn from their mistakes essentially, and get better and better. So to answer your question, like, yes, the journey agent should be able to fix errors. It already is doing that, itself as it's trying to build out journeys for the users.
Perfect. Thank you. Someone's asking, would it be possible to feed a requirements file, for example, as an Excel file, to the journeys agent, and the agent would then output the journey?
Yeah. We've thought a lot about and talked to some customers about like journey briefs, which I've often seen as like Word or PDF documents. I don't see an issue with Excel files either. We need to make sure we support that file type upload. But the idea is sound where you provide some requirements to the agent and it's able to parse those requirements and build that out for you. And something that's really excited about what we're doing with agents is as we introduce more and more agents, like for different tasks, for audiences, for segmentation and journeys, you can upload an increasingly large requirements file and it'll be able to configure a lot of objects in the system for you and present it back for human review.
That's awesome. Someone's asking, are agents specific for a domain or can they be universal?
Yeah, so if we go back to kind of like where we're mapping it out, like if we think of the main modules of CI360, when we talk about domain-specific agents in the context of what we're developing, we really mean like an agent for audiences, an agent for journeys, so on and so forth. So we are developing like domain-specific agents in that sense. But again, keep in mind that it's all under one multi-agent ecosystem. So for the end user, you're just talking to one agent, and it's delegating all that work to the appropriate domain agents. And that's kind of our strategy for now.
Gotcha. Someone's asking, can AI created journeys be edited by humans and vice versa?
Yeah. I should have shown that in the demo. That's a really good point. So in my example, I uploaded a brief. It came up with a plan. It built out that journey. What I didn't show is that after the agent had built the journey, I can go in and edit any part of that journey manually. Or I could also, keep talking to the agent and give it an additional request. Be like, hey, can you actually tweak, from using SMS notifications to using emails, like for these nodes and things like that. So the idea behind our agent strategies, you can collaborate with them manually, or you can provide feedback to the agent to make sure we're building out these campaign objects, the exact way that you want them.
Perfect.
Really good question, though.
Yeah. Someone's asking, can prompt engineering enhance the use of Copilot?
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious if you mean like prompt engineering work that we do, or just you mean more tips and tricks for how you prompt Copilot to get better responses. I'm going to assume the latter there. Something that's really helpful is we have a bunch of default prompts. So as you navigate around CI360, based off where you are, it suggests different prompts to kind of get the conversation going. I would recommend looking at those and how those prompts are formatted as kind of like best practices for how to interact with it. Just keep in mind, CI360 is a really large solution and there's lots of different capabilities in it. So oftentimes being very specific in your questions, you're going to get better responses. So if I'm asking a question about a task, you should specify which type of task, like an email task, a bulk task versus triggered task. Being very specific with the Copilot will help you get, more useful responses.
Gotcha. Thank you. One final question here. Does it work equally well in all languages, like when database fields are not in English?
Yeah, so in our white paper, we talk about this in a good amount of detail. We develop our capabilities in English first, and that's what we do the majority of the testing in. But we also do language evaluations for all the languages that our UI supports. And part of our decision criteria when we're choosing which large language model to use to power capability is evaluating that model's capability in different languages. So The model family that we most often use is Anthropic Claude models, and we found that they have really robust language support for the languages that most of our customers are using. So we've heard pretty good feedback from customers across the world on the language capability. And it's certainly something that we try to maximize for, although it's something that's hard to get perfect, especially in regional dialects and things like that, is still a little bit tricky for AI models.
Perfect. Yeah, good to hear that it's
Yeah.
language friendly for the most part. I'm
Yeah.
afraid that's all the time we have for questions today. But if we did not get to yours, we will answer all unanswered questions in our follow-up communities post. Thanks, Mac, for your answers. And thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us. On behalf of myself, Mac, and all of SAS, we really hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.